Before I start, I will give you our standard boilerplate disclaimer. This webinar is designed to provide accurate and timely information regarding most aspects of note acquisitions and sale of notes. There is no intent on the part of Triumph Capital Partners or its members to render legal, accounting, or investment advice, or to solicit any of these services. Every viewer should consult their own professional advisor on the topic outlined above. The opinions expressed in this webinar are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views of any other individual or organization. Okay, let's get started. Again, today I'm going to discuss the FDIC notes and introduction. I call it an introduction as there is much more that needs to be learned about the process of buying or selling notes. I am including a list of reference materials for you to access at your convenience, which will give you a more in-depth knowledge of the FDIC and the note business. As the business is an ever-changing field of new ideas and techniques, staying up on what's going on in the financial markets and with the government regulation will give you the upper edge in working with your capital. The presentation topics that I will be discussing today include background history of the United States and world economic state of affairs, why the FDIC is controlling the note business, what a failed bank is and how our banking system handles a failed bank, what a note is and why notes and not hard assets are the business of the next several years, performing notes and non-performing notes, timing of the note business, how to be successful in the note transaction business, and steps in transacting notes. Now let's discuss a brief history of our economy in the last 100 years. Our economy has been one of cycles that used to have lasted about 20 years. 20 years is about the time of a generation, and it seems like we have issues of passing on the learning from one generation to the next, which seems to track at 20 years. But there's a fundamental shift in our economy and how we learn. We are becoming a world economy, and things that happen in China, Europe, South America, and even here in the U.S. affect the world economy and our economy. Our economic stability and viability is tied to the world economy, and issues around the globe now significantly affect the U.S. economy. There have been some tremendous ups and downs in the past 100 years, and I want to spend a little time discussing some of the periods. The period of time that most of us have heard about, but few of us have actually lived through, was the Great Depression. The Great Depression began in October of 1929 with the stock market crash, and for all practical purposes lasted to about 1945, nearly a 25-year period. Before the crash, the 1920s were frequently referred to as the Roaring Twenties, with lots of prosperity and wealth. We were in the industrial age. After the crash, great despair, poverty, and social havoc existed. Many people today, even newscasters and reporters, are comparing today's world economic situation to the Great Depression. And while it is true that the recession of 2009 is the worst since the Depression, it is of no comparison. For example, the unemployment rate today is about 10.2% versus 47% in the Depression. And there have been 133 banks that have failed in 2009 as of Friday, December 12th, versus well over 10,000 bank failures in the Depression. It was during the Depression that banking laws were changed and the FDIC was started in 1933 to protect investors and depositors from the collapse by ensuring depositors and keeping a conservative viewpoint on banking with conservative legislation. It was also during the Depression that the largest transfer of wealth occurred ever in the history of the world. This was a great tragedy for most people, but was a great opportunity for those who used the tools available to them to make the best of the bad situation. The end of the Depression was really brought about by World War II. And after the victory came the greatest and longest lasting period of prosperity in the American history. Tom Brokaw said that this generation, which he labeled as the greatest generation that ever lived, had strong work ethics, strong family values, and strong faith values that contributed to their success. Their mantra was this: build a generation that had a better life than we did. And that they did by giving birth from 1946 through 1964 to what is now called the baby boomer generation. But as boomers entered the workforce, growth came at significant cost and experiences such as the oil embargo of the 70s and Jimmy Carter's economic policies, with 20% interest rates creating deflation and stagnation. The collapse of prices of energy and the farm products combined with deflation and the 81-82 recession created significant defaults on loans at savings and loan companies. Congress reacted too slowly, and the struggling savings and loan companies took great risks, forcing non-struggling savings and loan companies to compete with them, creating the collapse of many savings and loans. The FSLIC, or the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Company, could not cover all the depositors' money, resulting in its collapse. Borrowing short for lending long is one of the reasons for the failure. The FDIC stepped in and stepped up the RTC, which was called the Resolution Trust Company under George Bush. The RTC sold 95% of the failed savings and loan notes for an average of 85% of their value. The total cost of the savings and loan failure during the 1980s, 1990s was estimated at $150 billion, all of which the taxpayer had to bear. When the stock market crashed in October of 1987, we saw another round of wealth redistribution, the greatest since the Depression. I purposely remember the 500 and 600 point drops of the Dow Jones Index during that time.